to be hosting this webinar where we are looking at the good participatory practice guidelines and largely in HIV prevention research or biomedical HIV prevention research. And we will be hearing from a great panel of speakers who are going to be sharing with us from, bringing different perspectives on how GPP has evolved and how it has really enhanced or revolutionized, I think, as one of the speakers is putting their presentation. But generally, we are looking at how we can, or at least hear how people have innovated in implementing the good participatory practice guidelines in the research work of HIV prevention. And it might not just be HIV prevention. You might be here because you're working in TB or you have worked in COVID-19 or in other emerging pathogens, and that the principles and the practices are really the same in terms of the good participatory practice guidelines. So we would like to take this opportunity and welcome you all, and thank you for doing the introductions as a lot of you are already doing. Really just tell us where in the world, who you are, where in the world you are, and what kind of work that links you or that makes you to have interest in GPP is. And with that, we shall then just go ahead and introduce our speakers that who are going to be sharing with us about all of the work that they are doing in the different parts of the world where we are. And we invite you at the end, or as we continue, please use the chat box to share with us some of the work that you have done, your thoughts, your questions, anything really. This is an open platform where we're going to be really hearing about the examples of multiple perspectives from a sponsor level to site level, as well as people in Zambia who are not directly linked with the research side, but they have at a national level worked on the good participatory practice guidelines and really implemented an innovative approach in doing so. So my name is Ntando Yola. I am with the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation in South Africa and Cape Town. And at the end, I will be sharing with you all some of the work that we have done here in Cape Town. And it's for that reason that we then invite you, all of you. So the first speaker that we will be hearing from is Sarah Reid, who is the Deputy Director of the Division of AIDS, known as DAIDS, within the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID in short, and she'll really be sharing with us about the evolution of community engagement within DAIDS. And we know DAIDS is the funder, and in fact, we will be hearing more about DAIDS, for which a lot of the research work that most of us are working on, and the history of DAIDS community partnership, and many other things that Sarah is going to be sharing with us. I think as Sarah is taking the stage, and we welcome you, and please go ahead as you load your presentation, and we're very happy to have you and hearing from the work that you'll be sharing with us today. Over to you, Sarah.
Great, thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation to participate in this webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants. I'm really excited to be here and also excited to participate in what I hope will be an interactive discussion afterwards to help try to better inform and potentially further evolve DAIDS efforts in community engagement and HIV research. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let me know, did that work?
This is working perfectly. Please go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, great. So again, I'm going to be discussing community engagement efforts that have been supported by the Division of AIDS within the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, sort of taking a little bit of a historical angle to talk for a moment about the origins of community engagement and how they've impacted our supported research over the decades, really, since we really started to have a meaningful and vibrant relationship with community within our research endeavors. And then talk a little bit about how our community engagement approaches have evolved highlighting a couple of research programs that are really important to our portfolio that are outside of the clinical trials networks. And then finally turning to NIH-wide efforts in the area of community engagement, and posing some questions that I would love to get some input on from this audience. Trying to advance my slides. There we go. So I think that we would all agree that there have been some really remarkable accomplishments in the field of HIV research. The development of effective antiretroviral therapy has turned HIV into a treatable disease, and people with HIV can expect to have a nearly normal lifespan. And I also think that we can all agree that these achievements have been made possible because of the voices of dedicated and persistent community members demanding really focused, accelerated research efforts. Early in the epidemic, researchers and investigators were separated and relationships were quite contentious. But because of dogged determination to be heard, community members have since become a vital and valued contributor to the research effort. And since that time, community engagement has actually become formalized and even mandated and funded by NIAID within our research programs. Community advisory boards, or CABs, have been the mainstay of engagement within our clinical trials networks. And those CABs also have played by in additional programs outside of our clinical trials network. And good participatory practice has for HIV research endeavors. But the types of research and the means of engagement have evolved over the years. If we think back to 1990, really in the beginning of the epidemic, some of you on the line might have might remember this or have participated. Others would have heard of or read about it. But in 1990, in May of 1990, activists launched a very impactful protest on the grounds of the NIH due to concern about what was perceived rightfully as a slow response of the US government and pharmaceutical industries to respond to the AIDS epidemic. So over 1,000 activists came to the grounds of the NIH and really, made a highly impactful effort to get the attention of NIH researchers, and in particular of Tony Fauci. And Tony has often cited this moment as a turning point in the HIV research program that NIAID has supported, and also in his relationship with community members with lived experience. And I pulled here actually a colleague of mine, Rona Siskin, has pulled quotes from his memoir On Call that was recently published that I think really summarize well the relationship that really began at this turning point of the activists, quote unquote, storming NIH. He says, "My decision to open the doors to the activist community was one of the best administrative decisions I've ever made. Over the years, their input proved to be invaluable to our developing the optimal design of clinical trials that were user-friendly to the participants and still yielded the most valuable scientific and clinical information. I grew to respect and like these brave young people very much, even though we sometimes disagreed, and they did not hesitate to publicly criticize me over these disagreements. But we learned from each other. I valued more and more their unique insight into issues that affected them and their community." And again, I think this highlights an important turning point. In fact, prior to 1990, NIAID had funded the first of the clinical trials networks, the ACTG, then known as the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, and now known as Advancing Clinical Therapeutics globally. But it wasn't until a couple years later that community were incorporated first on community advisory boards that were really sort of on the side of the main activities of the group and not fully incorporated into the structure of the ACTG or the group meetings. Again, in 1990, there was a turning point where community members were actually now invited to attend meetings. They were invited to attend meetings of the scientific committees. And by July of 1990, the community constituency group, which was formation of multiple CABs that would later go on to become known as the Global CAB, were formally integrated into the ACTG. And since that time, community advisory boards and other community engagement efforts have been a main part of our 4 clinical trials networks, which are shown, their logos are shown at the bottom of the slide: the ACTG, IMPACT, HPTN, and the HIV Vaccine Trials Network. What are CABs? They are formal advisory groups that are coordinated either by research studies, sites, or networks. They're made up of diverse community members, ideally varying in age, race, gender, education, religion, and sexual orientation. And they meet regularly to provide feedback either to the site or to the network that's relevant to the local community that they represent. And they really provide a means of two-way communication between the research sites and network and the broader communities for whom the research is meant to be most impactful. And this is a recent picture of the ACTG's global CAB at one of the annual meetings. The interactions between the researchers, NIAID, and community members has led to some, I think, important resources and tools that have been developed by community within our research networks, including some recommendations for community engagement in HIV/AIDS research, which was developed in 2009 and later updated a couple of times as a way to document good community practice. And again, it focused on CABs, but also recognized additional types of engagement and was developed around the same time that the good participatory practice guidelines were also developed and really are in alignment with them, I would say. And since these early days when CABs were first established and incorporated, I think on an ongoing basis, community really are making vital contributions as part of their regular interactions with our networks. I think very importantly, community input helps to inform the very basis of our research portfolios, which are research through participation in scientific committees across all of the networks. They're able to voice opinions about what research is really most important to them and to the communities they represent. Community members also participate on our protocol teams and are very important members, along with investigators and every other team member who really make these protocols come together and implemented efficiently. And they're able to voice questions and concerns about trials and their development, and really are able to help shape those trials so that they are the most feasible, practical, impactful trials that they can be. Another vital role is to assure the appropriateness of informed consents, which is a main document for participants to be able to understand what trials are about and what it is that they're getting involved in. They advocate on behalf of clinical trial participants, educate community to increase knowledge around the areas of HIV research that we're funding, and increase awareness of trials. Importantly, help interpret and disseminate research results, and overall promote ethical. But what about outside of our clinical trials networks? As I mentioned, community engagement is very important across our entire research portfolio, which spans from basic science all the way to clinical trials. I'm just going to highlight a couple of those programs, one of which is our Centers for AIDS Research, which is a really important program that we've had for decades that's meant to drive collaborations across multiple HIV research disciplines and provide support to researchers at now more than 20 universities across the United States. We've always encouraged CABs to be formed by those CFARs as part of their very foundation of the programs. And now all of those CFARs do have local CABs that are really vital components of the structures of those research organizations. They're composed similarly to the clinical trials CABs of community members, representatives from community-based organizations, and then representatives from the clinical trials networks so that there's cross-communication. To increase research capacity of communities and develop relationships and collaborations between researchers and community members. In addition to the local CABs, there's a national CAB that links all of the CFAR CABs, all 20 of them, so that they can provide really important input at a national level. Importantly, when decisions are being made about research priorities and initiatives that will be funded on an ongoing basis. So through that national CAB level, they're able to provide expertise on community ideas, priorities, concerns at the level of national meetings and the national organization. They provide recommendations, again, about funding initiatives and standing CFAR programs such as developmental awards and new investigator awards that, again, are really the bread and butter of the CFAR programs. An additional program that's, again, outside of the clinical trials networks that really, I think, has been markedly strengthened by the actual structures of these grant awards is the Martin Delaney Collaboratories, which is a flagship NIH program for HIV cure research. And the purpose of these collaboratories is to foster dynamic multidisciplinary collaborations between basic applied and clinical researchers who are studying HIV persistence and developing potential curative strategies in partnership with government, private sector, and community. And the logos here are from the 10 currently funded Martin Delaney Collaboratories. And then the logos at the bottom are all of the NIH institutes, in addition to NIAID, who fund these collaboratories. So it's a very large and important program. But there's been evolution of the community engagement in these programs, starting in 2011 with the first round of the awards, where community engagement and CABs were not required and were not actually front of mind because this was a basic science program and it was somewhat novel to think of engaging community in a basic science endeavor. However, because of the experience through development of HIV therapeutics in particular, folks who are involved in that effort, basically drew attention to the vital importance of the community engagement, especially sort of at a ground level. And after not very long, each of the Martin Delaney Collaboratories that were funded at that time, there were 3, did then incorporate community into community advisory boards that were supported by NIAID. In 2016, with the next recompetition of those awards, the program was expanded to allow for clinical trials. And so that community engagement became even more important and was recognized and mandated within the request for applications that each collaboratory did have a community engagement plan and a community advisory board. And then most recently, we actually did not support clinical trials through those collaboratories. However, that given the importance of engaging community, even at the earliest stages of cure research, we still included a requirement for community engagement within our request for applications. And this time, we actually expanded to require community partners that were distinct from and independent from community boards to really help facilitate community engagement. And I think that's been sort of a novel aspect of that program. So among the requirements were to have a community engagement coordinator who would help to define the community engagement activities and provide coordination across community partners as well as the CABs. And it's really the community partners who are engaged to carry out community engagement activities, mainly to increase HIV cure research awareness and literacy among the local communities, and to gauge acceptability of potential interventions, for example, to discuss ethical considerations, which come up quite a bit in cure research, and to try to set realistic expectations for a cure among the communities impacted by the research. Community advisory boards or CABs still remain a vital part of our community engagement efforts, but there was an expansion to include the community partners with the most recent round of awards. And I'm just highlighting here some of the contributions that have come from that community engagement effort. These are some publications that I think have been really impactful and really thoughtful regarding some of the most important issues in cure research that affect community members, including things like recommendations around analytical treatment interruptions, ethical and practical guidelines surrounding cell and gene therapy. And then I think a particularly interesting read is the highlighted on the lower left-hand side of the slide, which is a model of one of the Martin Delaney collaboratories called Beat HIV, a model of how to engage with community and basic science researchers in a really effective way. And then at the NIH level, there's also been a recent, I think, concerted effort to try to engage community and the public as true partners in clinical research, really embracing the philosophy behind good participatory practice. And this is, I think, in part reflecting the priorities of our current NIH director, Monica Bertinoli. She's really very supportive of this project. And it stems from a belief that engagement should be tailored to the needs and experiences of people and communities, and that they should provide direction of the research that's impactful to them. And so NIH launched an effort to develop a vision and framework for incorporating public voices in all phases and types of clinical research. They have a website and have had a series of webinars. They had recently closed a request for information, again, to try to get feedback from public about what NIH should be focusing on. And I had recently the privilege to participate in one of the working groups within the NIH Engage program that put together a series of case studies that are available on that website that I'm showing here, that really are a series of tools and experiences across the NIH from different institutes to basically try to provide tools across NIH and across public to researchers, anyone who wants to use them, to try to provide resources for sort of best practices for community engagement. And I was able to provide both the guidelines for good participatory practice, also recommendations for community engagement in HIV research that were put together by our partners and stakeholders, because I think they're really valuable resources, and I would love to see the broader NIH community take advantage of them. So just to wrap up, thinking about the future of community engagement with NIAID's research efforts, now is a really important time for us as we're getting ready to recompete the awards for our clinical trials networks, and really looking across all of our networks, all of their research portfolios, as well as their operations, to think about what can we do, where's the science going, what's working well, what can we do better, and that includes community engagement. And so I pose questions, to this audience of, from your experience, those of you who have interacted with our clinical trials networks, are there areas where we can improve, or are there areas we should change? Are there ways to extend our community engagement further across our research portfolios? Are there novel methods we should consider for engagement? And importantly, how do we measure the effectiveness of our efforts? That's something that I'm interested in trying to do a little bit more systematically, as we haven't had regular check-ins, I think, to really say is what we're doing working, both from a perspective of the networks and researchers, as well as the perspective of communities, and ask across those relationships, how well are things working? So with that, I'll close, and I really want to acknowledge some input from some of my colleagues, Rona Siskin, who's been involved in community engagement efforts for the Division of AIDS for a very long time, since the beginning of our research efforts in HIV, and she provided a number of the slides that I've used. And then Diane Lawrence and Carl Salzwedel, who provided me with some background regarding the CFARS and the Martin Delaney Laboratories. So with that, I will stop sharing.
Sarah, thank you so much. I think you have taken us through the history of trials and where the concept of community engagement came about within NIH. I think that it was really great to hear that, because this really speaks to GPP and community engagement, and the fact that you are highlighting that this was a call from communities who were affected by a lot of work that was being done by NIH, and really the power that has led us to be able today to talk about good participatory practice guidelines. And you might call it community engagement, and or call it good participatory practice guidelines, but it is really the same concepts, the principles and practices of ensuring that multiple voices and stakeholders are involved in the conduct of different forms of research. And the next person we're going to be hearing from has actually worked alongside the work of the multiple networks that you have shared. And this was HPTN 071. And we are going to now be hearing from Clever Chilende, who is a programs monitoring and evaluation manager at the Treatment, Advocacy and Literacy Campaign, TALC, and who is going to be sharing with us about TALC and the community scorecard that they took upon themselves as advocates and communities to really work with research, but provide a mechanism of accountability in the conduct of good participatory practice guidelines. Clever, I hope you are ready, and we are really looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you, Clever.
Thank you, Ntando. Yeah, my name is Clever Chilende. Just like Ntando said, I work for an organization called Treatment, Advocacy and Literacy Campaign. Treatment Advocacy and Redress Campaign is an advocacy organization. So we work a lot with communities and we do a lot of advocacy around access to treatment. We do a lot of engagement as researchers are conducting clinical trials. Basically, for today, I'm going to talk about what we've done to revolutionize GPP in clinical trials. Next slide. So basically, our work started somewhere around 2013 to 2018, when the POPAT study, which was a randomized study, which was evaluating the impact of a package of HIV prevention intervention on HIV incidents at the community level. This was being conducted in South Africa and Zambia. So when this study was being introduced, Zambia organized a meeting to share what their plans are and to share also the study or the trial that they were about to launch. And during these meetings, as advocates, we demanded that we should also be involved because we believe that we are leaders in the HIV space, and we were convinced that our advocacy experience, if it's brought to this study, it is going to bring a lot of positive results. So during this meeting, we demanded that we should have a press on the table where decisions about this trial are being made. And our demand actually gave birth to what we started calling as the Community Partnership Platform. The Community Partnership Platform actually is a group of CSOs that came together to play a law of community advisory mechanism. And this was supposed to be done side by side with the Community Advisory Board. We realized that traditionally in Zambia, community engagement is done through Community Advisory Board. But we thought that bringing our advocacy experience to this table is going to improve the way community advisory mechanism operates in this country. So this structure sits on various levels of the study. And in order to hold each other accountable, we thought that we shall not just do community engagement. We need to hold ourselves accountable to the work that we shall be doing. Next slide. So this actually, because the realization that we need a mechanism to hold ourselves accountable gave rise to what we now call the GPP scorecard. The Good Participatory Practice Community Scorecard is a tool that we have been using to hold ourselves, the community, the advocates ourselves, the Community Advisory Board, and the research site accountable. So prior to the POPAT study, community engagement was spearheaded by the Community Advisory Board. However, we thought that this engagement with communities was not effective. We realized that it had limitations, especially when it comes to providing feedback to the community. We realized that they did not have adequate platforms at community level to provide feedback on what is going on at the site to the community. So it was felt that the community engagement in research was not actually also structured and organized, missing out certain gaps that needs to be attended to. So we also realized that the visibility of community actors in the community engagement was missing because they were not adequately brought on board. There was also a weak community feedback loop before, during, and after the research. So look at all these factors, they led to the sites being isolated from the community. So we realized this gap, and we decided that going forward, for the community feedback loop to be improved, we need to come up with a tool that we are going to use that is going to be participatory and ensure that everyone is brought on board as and when the clinical trials are being conducted. Next. So the objective of this community scorecard was actually, one, to increase community engagement and participation in clinical trials. We also wanted to see an enhanced accountability mechanism in community engagement in the research processes. We also wanted to facilitate or come up with a structured and organized community engagement in the clinical trials. We also felt that by coming up with the GPP community scorecard, we are going to strengthen the community feedback loop in the research processes and also create community ownership and visibility of the sites at community level. Next. So how did we do our processes? So first and foremost, we held a number of focus group discussions with different population groups and advocates to identify any gaps that they see in the conduct of community engagement. And also, we also wanted to look at what are some of the successes in terms of community engagement that we can learn from. So after doing this, we identified common themes with the results that we are getting and also looking at the identified issues. We used the themes to come up with indicators. So our community scorecard has indicators that are depicting the gaps in terms of community engagement as and when clinical trials are being conducted. Then after we develop these indicators, we administer the community scorecard with these different groups and also different advocates to come up with issues and gaps in terms of the manner the community engagement is being done. After the results are generated, we hold an interface meeting with the site staff and other interested parties to discuss the results. And once we do this, we then go into action planning. The action plans are developed from the issues that are identified in the scorecard. And once we develop these action plans, we then give each other responsibilities. If it's a site that are supposed to conduct that activity to improve community engagement, they are given that activity to do it. Those that needs to be done with advocates, they're given to the advocates and they work on those action points. Those that needs to be done with the community partners, they are given to the community partners to do to implement those action plans. We repeat this process. Once we do that, we repeat the process on a quarterly basis to see whether there's improvement. So we review our action plans on the quarterly basis. And during those quarterly meetings, we also ensure that we administer the community scorecard to understand if the gaps are still existing or they've been addressed. Next. And what have we seen with the implementation of the GPP community scorecard? One, we have seen increased community participation in the research processes. We have also seen an improved relationship between the community and the research site. The community now become well-versed, they become knowledgeable with some of the studies that the sites in their districts are conducting. And also community engagement efforts are now being measured and tracked to see whether our efforts are giving us the desired results. We've seen now that we can now target our efforts in terms of community engagement, meaning that our community engagement is organized and structured, making it easy to identify gaps in community engagement and work towards addressing those gaps in community engagement. The other issue that we have seen is the visibility of CAB activities, which have been enhanced at community level. Partners now are able to identify who the community advisory board for their zone are, and they're able to engage them. They're now very visible, and that has also improved the relationship between the site and the community. We have also seen increased community appreciation of research work. There are times when the communities, they do not know what the site is doing, and it becomes very difficult for them to appreciate the work that the research site is doing. But when you increase this community engagement, you bring the people from the site in these community platforms, and as they share what they are doing, it becomes easy for the community to appreciate the work that they are doing. We have also seen a reduction in community myths about research activities, because now the site is able to demonstrate the good things that they're doing for the community. Next slide. What are some of the challenges that we've seen in administration of the GPP community scorecard? One is the lack of information on trials being conducted in their respective areas or districts. It becomes very difficult to administer a community scorecard if people are not aware of the clinical trials that are taking place in the community. So in the beginning, it was very difficult because they never understood what the sites are doing. But as we increase this relationship, as we increase the engagement, they were able to tell us some of the gaps clearly in terms of community engagement. We have also seen a limitation in terms of research literacy among community representatives, which lobs the process of adequate input during focus group discussions. It's better when you're dealing with holding this community, focus group discussion. It becomes an advantage if the people that are in the focus group and have got a bit of knowledge in terms of research literacy. Then in that way, they'll be able to identify gaps in terms of community engagement. Then this process is new in research conduct, and participants may not fully understand the rationale. And if you are administering this community scorecard and the participants in the focus group discussions, they do not understand the rationale behind you administering a community scorecard, it becomes very difficult for them to have a buy-in. The other thing is that relationship building may take time, and we have seen it, but over time, I think we have built good relationship, and the GPP community scorecard is actually maturing, and people now understand it. They understand the rationale behind the administration of a GPP community scorecard, and they're able to come on board and feel part and parcel of the research process. So basically, these are some of the challenges that we've seen in the administration of a community scorecard. Next slide. Recommendations. So our recommendation is that we should improve community awareness of trials being implemented in any district and area, so that communities are aware of what you are doing, because at the end of the day, they will be the beneficiary of the products that you are researching on. We also recommend that there should be a lot of investment in research literacy among community actors, so that they can appreciate and understand what these clinical trials are all about, and also so that they can also appreciate the value of conducting clinical trials in their area. Lastly, the last recommendation is that we encourage research sites to adopt the GPP community scorecard as a way of measuring community engagement effort. Next, in conclusion, I can say GPP community scorecard makes community engagement organized and structured. It helps track and measure GPP efforts in a clinical trial, and it also helps to hold actors in the research conduct accountable. And lastly, it improves community participation in clinical trial, therefore creating a sense of ownership of the trials that are being conducted in a particular area. I think I should end here. This was my short presentation.
Clever, thank you so much. So much work. I think, as we all know, we called this an innovation in GPP, in good participatory practice guidelines, but Clever has called it a revolutionizing GPP, which I think we all agree with the presentation that we are hearing of the work that has happened in really making sure that as part of the research conduct, by researchers. There is a broad engagement mechanism that is really bringing everybody. But most importantly, the scorecard is basically ensuring and looking at how we really make GPP in the science about the people and about the community. So thank you very much. And again, thank you as well with all of the questions. I see the chat box is buzzing with a lot of questions. And thank you, Stacey, for sharing the questions from Sarah, which are an important opportunity as part of this engagement so that we are able to have our voices heard by NIH or DAIDS. And as well as the chat box as well. There's a chat box, but there's also a question and answer. You can see and follow Nita there, who has really used that box as well to ask questions. And these are all questions that are going to be engaged in. So I think as we go on to wrap this up, I am going to quickly be sharing from the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation in terms of GPP, which I think brings both the concepts that we have heard about of community engagement, as we have heard from Sarah, but the GPP and finding mechanisms of ensuring that there is an accountability mechanism, which I think the scorecard that we have heard is really an innovative and a revolutionizing way of conducting GPP. Now, as we hear quickly from the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation, which, by the way, this year is turning 20 years, or we've turned 20 years in the past month of August. And part of the work that we'll be sharing is really the evolution of how we have worked with the community from as early as 2004 within the communities of Cape Town, and where we have initially in some early phase HIV vaccine studies, and throughout some of the studies that you will be hearing about, we did community engagement. And of course, with the history that I think we all know about of how the PrEP research work had controversies in the early 2004 and 2005 in Cambodia, where a trial was not initiated, and in 2005 in Cameroon and Nigeria, a trial was discontinued because communities, like we have heard from Sarah, that communities wanted to be involved. And these trials were seen as by communities as trials of HIV prevention that really did not involve trials. And that is why in 2009, we had the first, in 2007, we have the first publication of the Good Participatory Practice Guidelines for Biomedical HIV Prevention Trials. And these were, evolved, and we had an edition in 2011, which really is much of the reference of what we have heard from both speakers about community engagement and good participatory practice guidelines. And quickly, this is where the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation is within South Africa, in Cape Town, as well as the Eastern Cape, in the East London area. A lot of the work that we are doing is happening there. We have heard, and I think we know, and it is always important to remember that all of the work that we are doing, like we've heard being emphasized by both speakers, that the work of HIV prevention, research or treatment, or TB prevention, treatment, and emerging pathogens, and many other health issues are really about the people, and people who are part of communities. And within these contexts, people are dealing with a lot of human rights issues and health issues. And I think it is always important to highlight these as we do community engagement and guided by good participatory practices, because they really transcend the work across this. I have mentioned that as the organization since 2004, we have done HIV vaccine trials, and a lot of PrEP trials that we hear about today. But one of the interesting and important things about the work of the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation is that when we found ourselves in a state where we are, where we have products that have worked, that have been produced by research and the good participatory practice guidelines, we now have had to figure out how these products go into communities, which I think a lot of us are really working in making sure that in HIV prevention, we have choice because choice matters, so that people are able to choose the products that work for them. So the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation, as part of the global partnership, has gone on to be involved to implement an implementation science study that is speaking to looking at how these products can be implemented in communities. Again, this is really an emphasis on recognizing that the communities that we are working with are not just about the trial, but and the research we're doing, but it's really diverse communities whose voices should be heard, who have to be seen as part of the conduct of research. Again, this emphasizes the same principle that GPP considers the context when within where research is conducted. And of course, we have a lot of concepts that really define community engagement. And in each of the countries, I think we've heard this from Clever, that we are actually also guided by other guidance within countries. And in South Africa, we have this ethics in health research, the principles and processes and structures of engaging communities, which is an important guidance as we work with the good participatory practice guidelines. Again, in South Africa, like many other countries, we have the good clinical practice guidelines as well. And all of those are really highlighting the important principles for which the good participatory practice guidelines really bring them together. And we have heard from both speakers that there are principles that are important, that the GPP guidelines help us to have mutually beneficial, sustained relationships that are transparent and respectful, and really doing community engagement in ways that strengthen the community's role and capacity. And Clever has really put this very nicely. And here are here is the structure of the good participatory practice guidelines, where we have, the first section that outlines some important concepts within, the conduct of trials guided by the good participatory practice guidelines. And the section 2, that a lot of the things we have heard today and some of the questions that you are asking are really speaking, to the guiding principles of respect for communities, mutual understanding, integrity of the research, transparency, and Clever's example is a great example of showing in looking at transparency and accountability, but importantly that communities are, can be autonomous. And one of the questions that we are hearing, or at least the concepts that we are being told about in the chat, is that actually communities are not, I think Luciana raises this, that communities are not just there to be consulted, they have to be involved in multiple ways. And then section 3 of the GPP guidelines takes us through the multiple practices, because this is where the guidance, often showing that the GPP, the research really is involving multiple stakeholders who are affected by the work. And again, as we have heard from Clever. Again, Clever has emphasized, and this is one of the things we have come to develop and that the GPP guidelines are helping us with, that GPP or community engagement is not just about CARE. And CARE, the role of CARE, as we have heard from NIH, is a very central role, and it continues to be central. But as part of this engagement, really challenging, Sarah has given us questions about how the network can, or NIH can really do this differently and better. And I think this is one of the things that we are hearing, that community engagement or GPP, it is not just CARE, it really goes beyond CARE. And this is one of the things that we have recognized as the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation over this period, to have community advisory board, but to also have other mechanisms of engaging in trials. We're a big organization, and we have people who are allocated across the different research sites and research projects of implementation and social behavioral research, who are actually responsible for leading the community engagement within the organization. And really importantly, be it you call it community engagement or you are guided, I think, as Clever has told us about the importance of structure on how we are engaged. And the GPP guidelines have really given us that, something that we can reference all of us. But most importantly, it's really about working with communities, be it it's through education, consulting communities, communicating with communities, but building partnerships as well as ensuring that communities have a role to participate, because this is what is central into the work that we do, the communities. So with that, we are then going to open it up to all of us to really hear all of the questions that you have posted, and many questions that are here. But I will encourage you to unmute and ask questions from all of the speakers that we have heard. And I don't know if we have Tulifia, who is also going to be working with me in really managing the questions that we have. But this is all about the revolutionizing and innovating in implementing research through the good participatory practice guidelines. So please raise your virtual hand, and we would love to hear from you and keep this conversation going. But importantly, we would really like to say thank you to AVEC and the partners for really bringing us this important conversation on innovation that is needed in GPP. Anybody else who has questions? So, Sarah, I will start with the questions that are really directed at you, that from Nita, that what are the plans of mentorship programs for community advisory board members to be resourced? And this is something that has been initiated by Hank as well. And so please keep the questions coming, but over to you, Sarah, on this question.
What the current status is. I've been consulting with my colleague Rana Siskin on the side here to see if she was aware of things that there was a plan to pilot that program, but I say something incorrect because I don't know, but it's something that we can follow up on. And I don't, if anybody else is on that is involved in that and wants to chime in, that's fine too.
Yes, that would be great. Anybody else who would like to come into that? And I think some of the questions, as you can see, sir, I don't know if you are able to see those questions, I mean, those answers to some of the questions. Clever, could you tell us, here's a question from Gisa, what have been your most successful arguments in advocating for more community engagement across the research continuum? And I think this is also true for you as well, sir. Clever, you are muted. Please unmute.
Yeah, so when we talk about community engagement and why investment should be put in community engagement, for clinical trials to be successful, you need the community voice because they understand the challenges that they face at community level. When you talk about, for example, when you talk about COVID-19 vaccines, that people were hesitant to take the vaccine because of the myths that are there. It is because we've not invested in community education. We've not invested for communities to understand what the trial they are taking, what is it bringing to the community. If people understand clearly the benefits of the trial that is being conducted in the community, it will remove all these myths to start with. It will also increase uptake of the product in the event that it shows efficacy. So community should be central in whatever clinical trial is being conducted. And that's the more reason we've been calling for more investment in community engagement.
Thank you very much, Clever. Sarah, would you like to also contribute to that?
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
I agree with everything that Clever has said. That, you know, I feel like I've seen instances where community input really on multiple levels and involved in the design of clinical trials has really helped to hone those protocols and make them feasible. You know, it takes an informed eye, I guess, to look through things like entry criteria and where researchers might not be intentionally adding restrictions, you know, that will make it difficult for enrollment. people with lived experience and people who have participated in trials previously will be able to spot things that researchers can provide that input to make trials more feasible. They can provide, I mean, that community members give us all the time in terms of how can we craft research questions so that when we have an answer at the end of the day, it's really something that's meaningful and impactful to communities. We can answer scientific questions that might be just interesting to a researcher, but at the end of the day, that doesn't get us very far if it's not also equally impactful for community.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. So one of the things that Sarah has done, and that some of us have responded to those questions, because Sarah has really asked us questions, because we are at a point within NIH of what she has called recompetition. And please come off mute and really speak to what needs improvement and what should we change. Or what should NIH change? What can be, how can we extend community engagement further across the research portfolio? Are there novel methods of engagement that can be employed? How do we measure effectiveness, which I think is very important, and Clever has spoken, to the measurement of, of community engagement or good participatory practice guidelines implementation. Please raise your hands. It would really be great to hear from you. I see we have people who are actually involved in many ways in different forms of research. And really, this is a platform for all of us to engage, and would love to hear from you. Please do not be shy.
So I am seeing some of the questions just while people are thinking of their questions regarding training and support for CADs. And I just want to point out that we do have really quite a number of resources that are available through HANC on the website, through the Division of AIDS, and through each of the individual networks. So I hope that people are aware of those. A lot of time, and thought has gone into preparing them. In addition to that, historically, we have had a number of webinars and other types of training as something that we can do. But I just want to make sure that people are aware of all of the things that are available online, because I think a lot of them can be really useful. They're very thoughtful tools that have been put together.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that, Sarah. So at this point, I'm also going to call on to somebody who has really been very instrumental in the development of the good participatory practice guidelines, and that's none other Stacey Hanna, because there are questions about the baseline developed for GPP. Did you do a community needs assessment? I guess that's speaking to you, but Stacey, that's speaking to you, Clever, and I think you have covered this in your presentations. But I think about GPP broadly, because Luciana also raises a point that maybe we should do an update of the GPP. So please, Stacey, also come off mute and off video and really respond to some of these questions, as they are really quite important. Oh, Stacey has dropped. I see that she has sent a message that she's going to drop off the call. Udom, all the way from
she's on Ntando.
There we go.
I am here.
Stacey, please go.
I am here, and while I have the mic, I want to alert you, Ntando, that a couple of people do have their hands raised.
So I did not see
they
them.
do, yeah.
Okay.
So I also want to really defer to the participants on the call, but have been watching the comments and questions coming in the chat with great interest, especially around this issue of what sort of baseline was behind GPP when it was initially developed. And I think something we think about a lot at AVAC, and I know a lot of our partners who are involved in GPP think about a lot in terms of, is GPP kind of keeping with the times, right? Is it the time to update it? People who are very familiar with the history of GPP know that the initial guidelines were developed in 2007, and they were updated again in 2011. And that was a pretty quick 4 years, but a pretty quick update. And I think since that time, we've we always think is about another update, and I'll speak to that. I want to answer quickly this issue of the baseline, because I think it's a really important piece of the history of GPP, and that GPP was not developed in a bubble. It was not developed just because we decided we needed another set of another guidance document around the conduct of clinical trials. It was really developed, and a lot of people who are on the line know this history. It was really developed because there was specific controversy around HIV prevention research, and questions that were coming up around the very first PrEP efficacy trials that were being conducted in kind of the mid 2000s, right around that time. And these trials were being implemented. They had been initiated. They had been reviewed by ethics committees and IRBs. So they had stood up to those tests. But what happened was there were questions coming up from community representatives and representatives of populations who were being enrolled in those trials about how participants were being treated. And it wasn't that there weren't good answers for those questions. It's just that what happened was there wasn't good engagement. And so the trials got shut down, and this was kind of the moment where the HIV prevention field realized, wow, this is something that really set us back, and we really have to figure out how do we engage these sort of external stakeholders in a meaningful way, so that we can ensure that this important research moves forward, but also that it moves forward with community concerns in mind. So that's really the baseline. And then I think to speak to the question about, was there sort of a measurement of community needs? I think that went into kind of that revision from the 2007 to the 2011 editions. And what AVAC did is sort of undertook a kind of a piloting process, because when that first edition came out, a lot of the people who were really hungry for this guidance said, this is great, and it it sort of outlines the principles of why community engagement is important, but it doesn't actually tell us how to do it, a step-by-step process. And so actually sort of and this is a long time ago, this is before my time, but undertook a process of getting input from the implementers of GPP, the users of GPP, to say, how do we sort of restructure this to make sure that it is addressing this need of laying out how do we actually do stakeholder engagement in each of these kind of steps of the trial life cycle. So that's a little bit of the kind of the history and what went into developing GPP. And so I hope that helps answer some of those questions. In terms of updating GPP, it's time to revisit, I think. Yes, I think we all know that the field of clinical research, and certainly in HIV prevention, has evolved quite a bit. And so, this is something that is high in our minds. I think, going back, I think it's a balance, right? We have to decide, is it worthwhile to go back and revisit the entire guidance document, go through all of that that whole process, or do we want to think about some addendums or some supplementary kind of guidance that can be added to GPP? So would love to continue the conversation, and I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, Ntando, for that.
I think the conversation really continues, and a lot of great work that we are seeing here. And Clever, I don't know if you have picked up any question, but I'm very excited because we have people who have decided that they are not going to be shy. They are going to raise their hands. Lorenzo and Ruth, please, over to you. Let's hear your questions. Jen, I hope they are helped to be able to unmute.
Yeah, I'm trying. There we go.
Fine. All right. There we go. We have them. Over to you, Lorenzo. Unmute yourself, please. We want to hear your voice.
Asked him to unmute. I'll ask Ruth also.
I think she answered my question. I was the one who asked the question about the baseline and the thesis.
No, absolutely. You can tell us more. I mean, let's hear more about that baseline question. And what was your thinking, Lorenzo, please?
Well, initially, with the participatory process, I agree you must involve community, but my consternation is that a lot of times people want to address and they say they're involving community, but they really don't. And I was trying to think of I'm a GCAP member, so I'm the Columbia GCAP representative for the AIDS clinical trials, and therefore I was just thinking about we've been trying to bring the GCAP into the 21st century because it really hasn't been modified since 1987. And it's time now to bring, I mean, even if you look at the AIDS clinical trial group, they've even changed their name. They're now the AIDS clinical therapeutics globally. And they've also come out with a language guide to teach people how to actually use the correct language when addressing various issues. So there are several paradigm shifts going on in the ACTG. So it's time for the GCAP as well as the CAPs to start initiating some type of change, in my opinion. So therefore, I'm pushing for that to happen.
It's time to move. No, thank you very much. Jen, do you have thoughts on that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was,
I mean, no, I meant Sarah.
Yeah, I was hoping to ask Lorenzo for his thoughts on that. Do you have, and do your fellow GCAP members have thoughts on how they'd like to see it evolve? Or, you know, should we do some sort of a survey to get some thoughts on what's working and what's not, and what are your ideas for how to get things working?
Well, we haven't been able to get this up and running yet because this was kind of a brainchild that I had because I'm a new GCAP member. And sometimes when you come aboard and you're new, you have fresh eyes to see things.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just looking at the ACTG has over 26 committees. And I was thinking to myself, how do you learn all about all these committees? I mean, there has to be some connection, not a disconnect. It has to connect and it has to be formalized and it has to be relevant to the community. And we're the global GCAP, so we're supposed to be the support for these CAPs. And we definitely need to look at structure in various municipalities as well as localities, and we should give them as much support as we possibly can. That's why I like the concept behind GPP. You know, it's very interesting how they, you know, I was reading, so I hope we get the slides, by the way, so that I can look in more detail. But I think that's a very good question. And any way you can help us, Sarah, because I think that Carl Deffenbach had a webinar just recently talking about paradigm shifts in clinical research, and therefore it definitely we need to look at how we can juxtapose clinical research with what we do in the community as well, because that's what
Thank you, Lorenzo.
is about. Thank you.
No, I think there's so much. And Jen, I'm sure you're listening, and it does sound like actually, which I think there are plans, you know, from your side to really do like we have seen previously, just before the competition, to really have tours where we are hearing from communities. And there's really a lot of feedback that is coming through. And I hope you agree and you really going to help that message.
Yeah, so I will try to post this in the chat before we end, but we now have a website, a web page up for posting information as it comes out related to the network recompetition blog posts and things like this. There's also an email address for submitting specific recommendations. We're not doing a formal request for information this go around, but rather taking it in directly. And the intention, to address Jim Pickett's comment in the chat, the intention is to review those, get whatever answer we need from the subject matter expert for the questions, if they're questions, and try to bucket them if there are duplicates, and post them in the form of frequently asked questions on that webpage in response to the requests for more transparency.
Thank you very much. I think we have just about 17 minutes or so before the end of this. And Ruth, please, Ruth, all the way from Uganda.
Thank you so much, Ntando. Let me know whether you can hear me.
We can.
Okay. So this is my first time interacting with the GPP guidelines and interacting with you. And I was going through the document and I came into a section that is on page 25 where it shows community stakeholder autonomy. And there is a particular sentence that I got interested in, and I just wanted to know more. I just want to read it for other participants who may not know, because I find it very powerful. It says, while a wide range of stakeholders generally participates in the design, approval, and implementation of a particular trial protocol, the self-identified interests of community stakeholders ultimately determine whether or not a trial is conducted in a particular area. Now, this shows that the community have been given the power to make that decision whether the trial should be conducted in a particular area or not. So I wanted to know whether there was a scenario where community representatives said no, this trial shouldn't be conducted in this area, from your experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you. Very important question, where really the community has the power to actually inform or even decide against the research, because, you know, ethically the research should first benefit the community. And I mean, are there any examples that you would like to share, Sarah or Clever? But we have a lot of people who are doing research as well. Nita, you're going to be next, and please, it would be great to hear from you if you have an example. Luciana, I know you have also been involved, and even yourself, you know, who, if you would be able to share. A lot of people who are here have can really please share any experiences where communities said this is not going to happen because we have not been involved. Lorenzo as well, I'd really, and anybody else who really has an experience with regards to that. But in the meantime, you know, Sarah and Clever, then we're hearing from Nita and anyone else after that. Do you have an example, Sarah?
No, I'm surprised I don't, and something might come to me as we're talking, but because I feel like it's not uncommon for community to weigh in and say this isn't important to us, or there are just problems with the design. It could be safety issues, ethical issues, or it's just not of interest. I think a lot of times thankfully those conversations happen early on when protocols are first being conceptualized, so that you know, we don't go too far down the road doing something that's not of interest, and or we adjust. But I feel confident that we actually have examples of things that have gone pretty far down the road and have then been cut off because community are not interested. I'm just having a hard time coming up with examples right now, but
no, and I think that's fine. And one of the interesting things to what you are saying, we have, you know, trials that are proposed at that level, which is your level at the funder level, and then they go to network level, and from network level they go to local and community level. I know that, you know, there are examples of communities who actually said this is not going to happen. But Ruth, this has really happened for a number of reasons. And according to the GPP guidelines, it should happen because the community is empowered and they understand. But in other instances that we have had, where communities said this is not happening in our country or in our community, it's because they were not informed about the research and the trials. And I know that, I mean, Clever, there are examples in Zambia actually in some of the microbicide trials that could not happen. Would you like to share that? And then we hand over to you, Nita. Over to you, Clever. And you are on mute. Clever, please unmute so that we can hear you. Clever, unmute, please. You have not unmuted.
Yeah.
Now
so the biggest issue that is what I talked about. I said that the challenge that we have at community level, there are different levels of stakeholders. There are those at higher level, for example, the minister, the permanent secretaries, those technocrats. That's another group of stakeholders. We've got those other stakeholders at community level. And probably this is where the biggest problem is. And when you look at that, those stakeholders, community stakeholders, you find that their level of research literacy is very low. A trial can be conducted in their community. They are not aware of that clinical trial that is taking place. And that's why we need more partnership, community partnership with research sites, so that whatever is happening at the site, community members also have got an idea of what the site is doing. And this is not happening right now. We through the community scorecard, we have seen community members coming on board, trying to understand what the site is doing. And that's the only way we are going to empower community members to demand that this trial cannot go on. The Mazapuka trial, though, was stopped based on rumors which were not. It was published in the newspaper. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone had that voice being put to the policymakers. They had to stop the trial because the force, the community voice was very high, was very strong, and that's why they had to stop that trial. But as it is now, we need to invest more in research literacy at community level. We need to improve the interaction between the site and the community. Not where something is happening at the site, the community is not aware. They just see vehicles moving out of this yard and then going in. What they are doing, no one knows. That becomes a danger also because it now breeds even myths. People now start speculating. As long as they don't have accurate information, speculation will creep in. And this is something that we need to avoid by investing more in community research literacy. Also investing in the interaction, partnership between the community and the site. They become one, they feel that they own the process. Whatever studies are taking place at the site, they own them. That's the only way we shall have the power in the hands of the communities to stop the trial.
Thank you, Clever. Nita?
So very quickly, thank you very much for an excellent session. So my suggestion of what can we do different, DAIDS and NIH, is that we really need to look at participant advocacy groups. We've done trials for 30 years in your history, and they are the users and uptakers. And ethically, I do not represent the community, even if I'm a CAB member. So that's a suggestion that I would strongly recommend we consider. It can be done ethically. We've got empowered people. Participants have spoken in events. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I believe DAIDS can do differently, NIH, but also other funders, is that GPP says formative work. But if you see the trials start from a clinical point of view, it's been happening, and even I do it. I mean, I'm in the field as long as you. And so DAIDS need to come up with a resource and a system where we have community science as exploratory objectives and or behavioral science, not as an afterthought, because people didn't use a product, etc. So that's the second thing I would recommend DAIDS do. The third is that there was an engagement last week, but that was limited to people in terms of access, etc. And I would recommend your questions really get into the system that we all can give feedback. And I would strongly recommend that each network present some of the work that you've done, or even yourself, so that you get direct feedback like here, because people may not necessarily do emails pragmatically. That's just the reality of the situation. Thank you.
Nita, thank you very much. And we're really approaching the end. At least we still have some 8 minutes. So please feel free to raise your virtual hand. I was missing them earlier, but I do think that, I have not missed any. And Jen is really sharing a lot of the resources that can help in engaging with NIH. But I think, Sarah, one of the messages is really that's coming through is that it really, we can expand to not just only be online, but really have some form of conversations and really hear voices and hear, and see people as part of the engagement. Now, Nita is really highlighting that one of the practices, the very first practice, is what is called formative research activities in the, in GPP, which is really a mechanism that whenever it is raised, there is a sense that, you get a response that we have some social behavior research, and maybe it should come in there, but it is one of the practices that are really not looked into. I would like to hear from you too, if what you think about that, and in fact, if there is any other out of the 16 practices that you really feel does need attention, like we have heard from you, Clever. Anyone of you, please, can take this question.
Come again, then.
Do you feel there are, within the GPP practices, there are some practices that are really not getting, as much attention? And I think the very first one at the top is formative research activities, I think, as we have heard from Nita. And the last one is post-trial access to trial products or procedures. And I mean, there are 18 of them. And I probably could quickly read them: stakeholder advisory mechanism, stakeholder engagement plan, stakeholder education plan, communication plan, issues management plan, site selection, protocol development, informed consent. We had somebody speak about informed consent. I think it was Udom. Standard of prevention, access to HIV care and treatment, non-HIV related care, policies on trial-related harms, trial accrual, follow-up and exit, trial closure as well, and results dissemination, as well as post-trial access to product and procedures. Are there any of these practices that you really feel they need more attention, or, or any that you could speak to in terms of your experiences?
For me, really, because of the nature of the work that we do as an advocacy organization, our focus has been on community advisory mechanism. And we feel that there are a lot of gaps in that area. When you look at for example, in Zambia, maybe other countries, when you look at the community advisory mechanism, the first thing that comes into mind is the community advisory board. But the community advisory board, when they sit at the site, the question is that who are they representing? Do they provide feedback to the communities that they claim to represent? That's one question that we should ask ourselves. And have we facilitated the process where they can provide that feedback to the community? Probably the answer would be no. So for me, community advisory mechanism for us as advocates, there are a lot of gaps that need urgent attention.
Thank you very much. I think that's really important, because that then challenges all of us as people who are advocating, and to really, at national level, I think like TALC has done, to make those linkages with research, because researchers really have interest of really making sure that the protocols are implemented within a local, at a local level, where the research has to happen. But at national level, I think TALC has given us a good example of ensuring that there is that loop of accountability between researchers and the communities at a local level, but communities at even at a provincial, at a provincial or even national level. Any thoughts, Jen, from this? And maybe you can also, Sarah, I'm sorry. You can also give us some of your last remarks as we come to the end. Sarah?
Sorry, I wasn't coming off mute for some reason. So I'm sorry, you wanted to get me to give last remarks?
Yes, please. And if you have any, thoughts on this, what we are talking about.
Yeah, so I really appreciate hearing all the feedback, not just on the community engagement, history of the Division of AIDS, but also on how better to incorporate GPP and which of the components of GPP I think that we need to focus on further. I think having this type of a dialogue is extremely helpful, and I really appreciate ABAC for putting this together. I appreciate the comments that that there isn't really truly enough communication about these issues when we're doing things like webinars where people don't have full access to them, or we have web pages where you don't know where your question is going, et cetera. So I really want to see if there are better ways where we can continue to have true dialogue. And if people have suggestions of how to do that, those are other things that you can either directly send to me or through our website. And we will try to accommodate what we can going forward, because I think that this is really, it should be a true partnership.
Definitely. That is something that is appreciated. Thank you very much. Clever, any passing, remarks? Please unmute, Clever. We're missing a lot of what you're saying.
For me, it's as we have these conversations around GPP. I would want to see a time when we strengthen the accountability mechanism, so that everyone feels part and parcel of the process, so that everyone feels that they own the process, they own the research process. They've got the right to demand for this. And before we reach that stage, then to mean we are still very far. We need to strengthen the accountability mechanism in the manner we conduct GPP.
Yes, thank you very much. Sarah Reid, Deputy Director of the Division of AIDS, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Clever Chilende, Monitoring and Evaluation Manager at Treatment, Advocacy and Literacy Campaign in Zambia. Thank you so much for really leading this engaging conversation about the innovation or revolutionizing the good participatory practice guidelines. And to all of you, the conversation continues, and thank you very much for engaging and really raising a whole lot of issues that are pertaining to how we do this better. And I think, as we have heard, provide mechanisms to expand it, to ensure accountability, but to have, importantly, communities inform the research that is happening. I will at this point, because this GPP...
If I may, Ntando,
and I will hand it over to Jen to really give us some announcements about the next and anything else. Otherwise, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ntando. And you pulled double duty for this call, for fabulous work moderating and presenting. And I just want to point out to everyone, this is the third in a series of webinars that we've hosted this year in AVAC that were really the result of gathering published evidence of the ways that GPP is being used and measured, the ethical underpinnings of GPP. So I've posted that in the chat, the body of evidence, and we've hosted these webinars in order to discuss the places where we need more research and more work, and where we can work together as a field to really start to improve our understanding of GPP and how to do it best. And there will be one more that's coming later this fall, probably in the middle of October after R4P, that we will invite you all back. There's a paper that's going to be published in The Lancet by Nina Gobat that is about the field of GPP and where we're at right now. And we hope to see you all back there. So thank you again, Ntando, Sarah, and Clever. This was a fabulous, fabulous presentations, and this discussion was amazing. And we look forward to seeing you back here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.